Reading with Joan.
Hi. Hi, kids. It says it's Reading with Joan StoryTime. Hello. Okay. Okay. Did you hear? Oh, the bird says it's time for us to enjoy a fun time of sharing our stories. Welcome. I'm Joan, your host for today. We have a special story for you.
Reading with Joan, the place for all the fun. Creative kids, come join us, come. Reading with.
Hey everyone, it's Big J here. Today we're going to be reading Black and British. There's just one little problem. I'm not sure where I put the book on this huge bookshelf. Can you guys see it? Where? Oh, there it is! Okay, here it is. Black and British. Let's start reading. Today we're reading about the Stuarts. They lived from 1603 to 1714. In 1603, James VI of Scotland also became King James I of England and now ruled over both kingdoms. The Stuart period lasted for more than 100 years, during which dramatic events shook Britain. A terrorist attack on Parliament, civil wars, plague, the Great Fire of London. One king was executed, another was kicked out and replaced. Meanwhile, a story was unfolding which would change the world and redraw Britain's relationship with people from Africa. Together with the Stuart royals, English merchants were developing new and brutal ways of making money. They built up slave-powered colonies in America and the West Indies and grew a trade in human beings that would make England the world's biggest slave-trading country. Wow. When one country starts a new settlement in another place, run as part of the home country, it is called a colony. Other European countries like England's rival, Spain, already had colonies in the New World on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Of course, nowadays, we know that all of the world was created at the same time, so there's no New World and Old World. Anyway, let's go. In the 17th century, England began to join them by taking control of land in America and the Caribbean. These colonies would become places where millions of Africans are taken and forced to work in inhuman conditions. Do you guys know what inhuman means? It means in conditions, in this case, conditions that are not fit for humans to live in or work in. Okay, let's keep reading. The first successful British colony in North America was Jamestown in Virginia, where English settlers arrived in 1607. In a few years, farmers in Virginia found they could make money by growing tobacco to send back for sale in the Caribbean. The first successful colony was the island of Barbados. There, the English settlers who arrived in 1627 found over time that one particular product could make them big profits. Guess what it was? Can you guess? It's sugar! The sugarcane plant grew well in Barbados, and people back in England loved it sweet. The problem was that it took a lot of work to grow sugarcane and turn it into sugar ready to sell. After growing and harvesting the plant, the cane had to be processed quickly before it went off. That means before it became out of date. Workers had to take the cane straight from the fields to squeeze the juice out of it between heavy rollers, and then get the juice quickly to the boiling house to boil it down to raw sugar. That's how sugarcane is made. This was hard, hot, dangerous work. At first, the people doing this work on Barbados were mostly indentured servants from England, Scotland, Ireland, and other parts of Europe. These were poor people and prisoners who were signed up to work for a period of 7 to 9. They were often very badly treated, but once their time was up, they were free again. As the sugar trade grew, the landowners needed more workers than they could get from Europe, and they began to use more slaves from Africa. The English turned the land into bigger and better farms, using more and more slaves to produce more and more valuable sugar. In the middle of the 17th century, Barbados became a whole island dedicated to farming sugar on big farms called plantations, powered by the forced work tens of thousands of enslaved people from Africa. Soon, there were more enslaved Africans than Europeans living on Barbados. Force the Africans to work and stop them from rebelling. The English landowners wrote laws which set the rules for a new kind of slave society. In 1661, they wrote a set of laws called the Barbados Slave Code. Who knows what that is? I don't, but now we're going to find out by reading reading the next part of this. The Barbados Slave Code set out the system in which the Africans lived as slaves on the island of Barbados. An enslaved person remained an enslaved person for their whole life, and their children automatically be enslaved too. How mean is that? So if my mum, who is Joan, was a slave, then me and little J would automatically be slaves too, for no good reason. Enslaved people were not allowed weapons. Violent punishments were listed in the code, which are much worse for enslaved Africans than for Europeans. A European who owned an enslaved person could hurt and even kill them without being punished. They could commit murder and nothing would happen to them just because the African person that they killed was just a slave. The law was totally different for Africans and Europeans on Barbados. A Christian, which they actually used to call a white person, who was accused of a crime had the right to trial by a jury, but a black person did not. To explain this unfairness, the slave code said that Africans were different because they weren't Christian. Now, I know plenty of Africans are Christians, including myself, so that wouldn't work nowadays. In this way, the strange new slave society split people by law into two clear groups: enslaved black people and white free people. It was around this time that the English started to use the word white to talk about themselves. Before this, people from Britain and Europe weren't used to thinking of themselves as a part of a group called white. But now we know that there are actually white and black people, because I'm not the color black and some of my friends are not the color white. Besides, there's some people who are not black and not white, so we can't really call everyone black or white. Anyway, the landowners in the West Indies hoped that if poor Europeans saw themselves as white like their rulers, not black like other workers, they'd be more likely to support the rulers of the black slaves rebelled. So now they only called people black and white just to get support. Wow, that's not nice at all. The slave system of Barbados spread to the other colonies, which England began in the West Indies, like the much bigger island of Jamaica. These systems also shaped laws in the English colonies in North America, where tobacco instead of sugar was the main crop farmed by slaves. Using enslaved people to grow sugar on West Indian plantations was a separate business from buying and selling people as slaves. Before about 1650, only a few English ships brought people from Africa to be slaves. Instead, the English colonists mostly used enslaved people stolen or brought from foreign traders like the Spanish. What changed this was the arrival in 1660 of a new King of England, Charles II. Charles saw an opportunity to make money by trading in enslaved people. English ships would take people from Africa to be slaves in the English colonies. They'd literally steal people from their home just so that they could get workers. Together with his brother, James, Duke of York, the future King James II, King Charles gave his support and money to companies which were set up to trade enslaved people. The company he set up in 1672, the Royal African Company, would be the only one allowed to trade all along the western coast of Africa. That's funny. So first of all, he supported other people that were trading, and then he set up a company, and then the people he supported in the past weren't even allowed to trade anymore. So what's the point of all that? Oh well. Any other English merchants caught breaking this rule could have their ships taken by the Royal Navy. The Duke of York himself ran the company as its governor. This powerful royal-led business enslaved more people than any other British company in history. Around 150,000 African people were taken across the Atlantic into slavery by the Royal African Company alone. So just that, like other European slave traders, the Royal African Company built forts called slave castles around the coast of West Africa. The traders lived comfortably in the slave castles, good food and plenty of wine. They lived in there. I wonder why they were called slave castles at all. Oh well. In other parts of the castles, the people they had brought from local slave traders were kept prisoners, so that's why they were called slave castles. Some traders burned the initials RAC for the Royal African Company or DY, Duke of York, permanently into the enslaved people's skin to mark them as the company's property. Wow. So they just stole people from their home and called them their own. You think you could do that if you had the choice? I don't think so. Iron shackles were fixed around their legs so they could be chained up. They were then loaded onto overcrowded ships for the horrific journey across the Atlantic Ocean, known as the Middle Passage. Around 1/5 of the enslaved people on these Royal African Company ships died before they even reached the other side. The Royal African Company put Britain on the path to becoming the biggest slave trading country in Europe. After King James The Second War ended. Other companies fought to be allowed to buy and sell slaves as well. They made it even busier and more profitable. In all, British traders enslaved over 3 million people. Over the next century, the money which British companies made from taking Africans across the ocean to be slaves flowed back into the country and paid for grand buildings, businesses, industries, and wealthy families all over Britain. So, it's true. A lot of Britain was actually just built on the money of slave trading. Wow. And here you can see a map of the West Indies right here. The biggest one is probably going to be Cuba. That was owned by the Spanish. Okay, everyone. I hope you enjoyed reading with Joan today. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Stuarts and what they did, even if it wasn't very kind. But we learned something new, didn't we? Okay, bye everyone. We'll see you next week.
Creative kids, come join us.
Okay, we are back. All right, okay. This birdie is impatient. Kids, we are back, and remember, we've been reading some lovely stories from the storybook, The Pot of Wisdom, Ananse story by Adwoa and Baba. Today's story, can somebody tell me? Okay, let's see. What is today's story? Today's story is... Ananse, the forgetful guest. What has he forgotten now? Kids, are you ready to join me to find out what he forgot? Of course we are. Of course, the little birdie is impatient. Oh, what is the picture we can see today? The picture we can see today is Ananse and a group of people. Can you see that? Let's find out what he forgot as we begin the story. Ananse had journeyed for miles and miles to take a message from the king of the forest land to the king of the coastland. Now, after several days of trekking through the forest, his journey was almost at an end. Ananse could think only of one thing: food. On the night he had spent in the forest, he had dreams of food, hot streams of rice and spinach sauce, or white balls of fufu with crab and palm nut soup. He had awoken twice with saliva drooping and nothing to eat except some moist leaf and few bugs and bush rats when he could catch them. Oh, shame. Ananse is dreaming of food when he has no food. Bad. Now, he was at last in the great town of Poanau, a guest of no other than the king of a coastland. He would deliver his message, and tradition demanded he would bath and eat. The king was a kind man, and after making sure that Ananse had been given a room, water to bath, a change of clothing, he instructed his senior wife to prepare a meal for him. Imagine the pleasure Ananse felt as the smell of cooking food filled his nostrils. Wow. Let me guess. He chuckled to himself. This will be rice and chicken stew that's cooking. Unable to wait any longer, Ananse dressed quickly and followed his nose to the kitchen. Do you want to come back and find out what he got from the kitchen? We'll be right back. Hi, kids. We're back. Ha! Mr. Ananse, you are so welcome, said the king's wife. You must be very hungry after the long journey. Yes, indeed, said Ananse. Right now, with the smell of your food filling this room, it is my pleasure to be hungry. With a flourish, the king's wife lifted a lid off Ananse's bowl. But at the sight of the food, Ananse collapsed. For in the bowl was the most despised of all food, dried cassava mash. In the forest land, it was called face the wall because you never wanted people to know that you were so poor that you had to eat that food. Certainly, it was not the food to serve a guest. Ananse was too shocked to even appreciate the delicious chicken soup that the king wife had cooked to go along with the dry cassava mash. Help! Help! Cried the king's wife. Our guest has taken ill. By the time help arrived, Ananse has emerged from his sudden faint. It is nothing, madam, Ananse said weakly. Only a small hereditary malander for cassava is forbidden to me. Even the sight of it affects me. Oh, dear, 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 said the king's wife. I'm afraid that this is going to be a difficult visit for you. In this town, we eat cassava at every meal. Impossible, thought Ananse. This must be tricky to test my resolve. Why would people eat cassava at every meal? Oh, but they did. In the morning, they ate cassava porridge. In the afternoon, they ate cassava mash. In the evening, they ate cassava roasted. Ananse had to go out each day to find moist leaf and bark to eat, for the news had spread that cassava was forbidden to him. The last day of Ananse's visit fell on the harvest celebration. A great feast was anticipated. By now, Ananse wished fervently that he could be allowed just a small bite of cassava, which the people of Poana cooked in a myriad of delightful ways. There was spicy cassava fries, cassava and vegetable stir fry, not to mention the soup and stew in which cassava was served. That night, he hatched a plan. The next day, dawning bright as though even the sky knew of the harvest festival and the feasting that would soon take place. Everywhere people buzzing about preparing food and preparing themselves for the festival in the public square where the king will be in attendance. The royal diets were erected, and sitting was arranged around a central clearing where speeches and prayers would be said. Early that afternoon, the people of Poano gathered for the festivals, adorned with brightly colored clothes of rich design, ceremonial silk, and two-piece suits sewn in the traditional fashion, which enticed by golden jewelries made of gold, silver, beads, and polished wood. Finally, the king made his entrance, but Ananse was nowhere to be found. The prayers were said and the speeches made. Gift bearers brought forward firewoods and other gifts to the king. Then, in the lure before the dance started, a very odd figure in a round grab of a farmer's laborer appeared behind a merchant, a misfit among the crowd of well-dressed harvest time jubilators. Ananse! The king thundered from his duress. What is the meaning of this insult? I beg your pardon, sir, but I thought you were going harvesting today, said Ananse. No, shouted the crowd. Today is harvest celebration. Oh no, said Ananse, hanging his head in apparent shame. You must think I'm crazy, but already I'm not. It's just this awful forgetfulness that comes to me occasionally. It is the same forgetfulness that made me say cassava was forbidden to me, when actually is one of my favorite vegetables. The king was pleased to forgive him and pleased that he did eat cassava. The people of Puranam were pleased to share their harvest with him. Many secretly thought Ananse was kind of strange, but since his visit, people sometimes pleaded his kind of forgetfulness whenever they are caught in tricky situations. Did you see what he just did? That is kind of annoying, right? That is kind of pretty annoying, right? But once again, Ananse is witty. What did you learn from the story? We'll come back and we'll share our lessons.
Reading with Joan.
Okay. What are you telling us? All right. Okay. Did you hear what the birdie said, kids? The birdie just told us that Ananse's wittiness made him free from the tricky situation. Kids, are you smart enough to get yourself out of situations you find yourself? Even though I do not agree with Ananse's idea of pretending he cannot eat cassava when he can eat cassava, but his wittiness saved him from a situation. How smart are you? I'm not saying you should lie, but I'm saying you should be smart enough to get yourself out of tricky situation. Once again, the lesson learned today is be smart to get yourself out of tricky situation. Remember, lessons learned are lessons to be acted upon. And on this note, I'll see you next time on Reading with Joan Storytime. Bye.